All right, here we go, everybody. This is part 4 in our series, Listening to Scientists and Our Grandmothers' Wellness at Work. My name is Christina Borbely, and I am here to present the session, Calming Our Nervous System by Noticing Nature. Usually I'm here with my colleague, Carolyn Spezza. You get just me today. And we're gonna do a mix of things together to really anchor us in some of the best practices around effective strategies for emotional regulation during periods of extended stress. This content is intended for folks working in education, so school counselors, school staff, teachers, administrators, everybody in the education context who needs to boost your resilience. And we'll talk about why that's important as we get going. I did want to let folks know there's going to be a mix today of me sharing, of you sharing, and we're also going to watch some video clips together. So why don't we go ahead and get started? I wanted to go ahead and share a photo of my grandmother, who is a key inspiration in my own self-care and wellness. And we're going to be talking a lot about what are effective practices in self-care and what we know both from our cultural heritage and our elders, in terms of traditional practice that's effective, as well as what we are learning from researchers and scientists. And so we'll combine those two sources of information to guide us through this content, but let's start by just reflecting on who have been influential elders, grandmothers or otherwise, in our lives. And I want you to think about what you may have learned from one of your elders or some of your elders about the natural world. How did that person connect to the natural world? Or what did they teach you about the natural world? And I'll start because this doesn't have to be hard. We can keep it really simple. The natural world is anything that's out there and living. It could be houseplants. It could be the great outdoors. It could be your front yard. It could be your balcony. And so just kind of thinking about what you may have learned from an elder. And I'm going to ask folks to go ahead and either unmute and share or put it in the chat. I'll start with an example. I have two. So one is from my grandmother. Her name is Daphne Powell, and she's no longer with us, but she had an incredible love of flowers. And as a child, I spent a great deal of time with her, and she was always seemed very fussy. And spent a lot of time grooming and preening all of her flower beds. And it was almost kind of like a meditative state for her. Or it would be something that she would kind of do and enjoy on her way to and from other tasks. So I remember kind of going to and from her house, and whenever we were coming or going, she would always take a moment to pause and see how a particular outdoor shrub was doing, or if something was flowering. And even if she wasn't officially in the like yard work or gardening mode, she always took pause to kind of take in and take a closer look at the natural world around her. This was in a suburban neighborhood, so not any kind of like huge manifestation of nature, but just the small things that she appreciated. The other example I wanted to share is based on my experience with my father, who hunted quite avidly when I was growing up, and I was the only kid that would be able to go along on the hunting trips. Mind you, the hunting trips were like a couple acres back on our 11-acre farm, so it's not like we were going anywhere besides tromping through the woods. But he said I was the only one who could sit still enough for him to take along. So I really appreciated that, but then also felt like I could never scratch any itches that came up while I was sitting in the tree stand, because that could like ruin the whole afternoon. So those are two examples of elders who really influenced my connection to nature and the natural world. Did anybody want to share any examples from their experience? And Sharon, if there's anything in the chat that folks added, I'd love for you to let me know.
Yep. Michelle said my grandfather to be observant on a farm, both with animals, the land and machinery, for both farm animals and wild animals of all sorts. And I agreed with her about all of it. Also raised on a farm. She also said, my sister can do so much with an animal that it never ceases to amaze me. Pat Scott, My grandfather, who always cultivated beautiful flowers, he loved trees, really appreciated farming and being outside whenever he could. His name was Pete, and so is my son. Tamara, my grandmother had to walk 6 miles a day, so I went with her. I ran through the wheat fields and the dirt road. Nature is great. Randy, my stepdad, his love for outdoor activities, camping, fishing, photography of nature, boating, love for sunset, sunrise, and the northern lights.
I love it. These are all wonderful examples. I'm so grateful to each of you for sharing and just acknowledging kind of the really broad spectrum in which the natural world presents itself. And so, at a minimum, when we're thinking about this, it doesn't have to require any more effort than just looking up at the sky. And so we're gonna just kind of keep that in mind and keep gratitude for our elders who helped us build those connections and appreciations as we learn more about the role of nature in our nervous system regulation. So I'm gonna go ahead and move us forward. For some of you who've been participating in this series, some of this intro content may sound familiar, but we're gonna set the stage, and this time we try and do it a little bit differently each time. This time we're gonna watch a short video to kind of set us up for why any of this matters to our wellness and the wellness of our colleagues. So let me get us started with this video.
Now, where do we begin? Let's begin with what we all have in common. More than we live in our city or town, more than we live in our house, more than we live in our car, we live in our body. At the most basic level, we share this common experience of being human and living within these bodies of ours. Kind of like this. Some days, being human may feel like all we can do, but most days we strive for more than just being human. We strive for being human with health and vitality so we can live meaningful lives. This is not just for our own benefit, but so we can be available to fully engage with children, youth, colleagues, and other people in our community we care about. But our striving for being human with health and vitality does not happen in a petri dish. None of us operate within the vacuum of a perfectly controlled environment. We are surrounded by life happening, good and bad. In some moments, the life that surrounds us is indeed wonderful and fulfilling. This feeling may come from friends who believe in us, beautiful flowers or trees in bloom, seeing the light bulb come on for a child, colleagues who offer encouraging support, living lives of purpose. And when those lives of purpose become a bit too much, for most of us, there's always the option of a warm dinner and a comfortable bed. But life is not all butterflies and ice cream. It takes a toll on us when there are students who are neglected, chronic student behavioral issues, workloads that feel unmanageable, too few resources to help students in need. There may be unsupportive managers, and on the hardest days, it's being in a workplace where we feel ineffective. If we experience an ongoing imbalance between our resources and the demands we face, the resulting stress may damage our physical health in the short and long term. Chronic stress can also impact how well we take care of ourselves and how we feel in our body each day, which is a problem because, again, more than we live in our city or town, more than we live in our house, more than we live in our car, we live in our body. But even when struggling to balance responsibilities and navigate challenges taking a toll on us, it's important to note that we are not alone. Among the treasure trove of fellow humans available to support us are scientists researching how stress affects the body, and things we can do to buffer the stress in our lives from impacting our health and vitality both today and far into the future. There are 7 buffers currently most recommended to mitigate the impacts of stress. Each of these reduces stress hormones, enhances neuroplasticity, and reduces inflammation, which all play important roles in counteracting the body's stress response and improving health and well-being. This group of 7 buffers is one of those science-based lists some of our grandmothers may roll their eyes at, as they knew all along that we needed these things in our life to be healthy. These are the fundamentals to taking care of a human being, to taking care of ourselves and each other. Before we begin going through these buffers and the science of why they are helpful, we need to pause for a moment because many of us tend to be high achievers and can be hard on ourselves if we're not doing all the things we think we should be doing to be responsible people. Please consider that our lives are comprised of different phases or chapters. In some chapters, we have space to prioritize things like quality sleep and physical movement. In other chapters, maybe due to surviving an injury or nurturing young children through the night, we cannot. As we go through these tools, please know that we share them in the context that everyone is living their own story. We honor that some of these recommendations may not align with the chapter you're in right now. Please take what's useful and leave the rest. What we are doing is trying to open a page, a space, where we can build in the caring for ourselves and colleagues just a bit more, where we can create shared experiences of caring by learning from those who may be able to give us ideas of what works for them. And we, in turn, can share what's working for us. If you are already taking care of yourself using some of the practices we describe, great. Keep up the good care and spread the word. Tell others what you're doing as a way of making self-care the norm. There is so much we can learn from one another. Because some of us could use an extra big nudge, we'll review the science behind why we can justify taking a few minutes out of the day to care for our basic human needs, and think of the grandmothers whose foundational knowledge of practical advice has been the source of our care for generations. Ready to begin? Wherever you are in your chapters, we start out with provisions for healthy boundaries and self-compassion as we move through this module. For all of us with these messy, meaningful lives.
All right. So today, these are the 7 buffers. And I wanted to just say that this series looks at all 7, but in particular, we want to focus on how these can really help heal our bodies at a cellular level from the impacts of stress. So we kind of take for granted that we're all experiencing stress. That's kind of the human condition. And some of us might be experiencing more chronic or more intense periods of stress, especially under current conditions. And so we're really making sure that we are focusing on how to make some of these strategies really concrete and actionable for you all. And in today's session, we're going to focus on the stress buffer of nature and how engaging in the natural world is a tool for better care for ourselves and for one another. And as we do that, as I mentioned, we want to honor the many elders, especially our grandmothers, who weren't necessarily reviewing all of the fancy research to understand the value of things like a potted plant or a vegetable garden or a sit on the stoop or stroll in the park. And so let's go ahead and talk about what do we want to get out of our time together today. We're going to make sure that we better understand how exposure to nature impacts our brain and our bodies. We're going to talk through how to choose strategies to support yourself and your colleagues to access natures, whether that's indoor or outdoors, or we're even going to spend a little time about virtual nature. And then we're going to consider how caring for the human needs can help buffer stress from impacting health, in particular your health. So those are our learning objectives today, and let's go ahead and get started. I'm just going to lay out what we know about the benefits of nature for our physiological regulation. So one example comes from research on healthcare, and we know that that hospitals are adding nature spaces to their campuses because of the research that shows that their patients who see a tree from their hospital bed or see other nature while they're there for their hospital stay are discharged earlier. They need significantly less pain medication, and they experience fewer post-surgical complications. So I'm just starting out with the big ticket items, right? If we need to know, like at a pretty significant level, a patient who in a hospital we can assume is under a significant amount of stress, the research demonstrates that they're showing better outcomes faster recoveries and more effective recoveries when they're able to access nature during their hospital stay. But what else, right? Let's take a look at some other research, again, from healthcare. And we know that patients recovering from a surgery who have nature in their room, and that could be as simple as a plant or a flower, had the following. They had lower blood pressure, they had less anxiety, they experienced less fatigue, and they rated lower pain experiences when assessed. And so again, oftentimes when we think about a friend or a loved one who's in the hospital and sending flowers, I would say thumbs up, do it, because the research is showing us that even those kinds of exposures to nature really influence outcomes. But how do we translate that to other life circumstances, day-to-day life where we're maybe not talking about healthcare circumstances or hospital stays? We know from the research that viewing nature scenes, so again, this could be real world scenes, this could be virtual scenes of nature, even just for 3 minutes a day, has the following impact on our physiology. Positive bodily changes in heart activity, muscle tension, blood pressure, and brain electrical activity. So just 3 minutes of gazing at this photo, and yes, this was purposely created so that you would have some time to look at nature during this presentation. You'll also experience things like reduced negative emotions, things like sadness, fear, and anger decline after 3 minutes of exposure to nature. You also will experience elevated levels of positive feelings, which is, I think, what we're all going for, and diminished stressful thoughts. So again, these are the kinds of things that we can benefit from. And even if we can't gaze out of our window and see something, a scene like this, I wanted to just make sure that everybody grounded it in nature can be accessible. The natural world can be accessible in so many formats. So I wanted to share some additional examples about the benefits from indoor nature. And that could be things like our plants. And I don't know if any of you have as many indoor plants as I do. Certainly during shelter in place during the pandemic, I think I quadrupled my number of house plants. But when we look at these studies, right, we know that you don't have to leave where you are to enjoy the calming, healing benefits of nature. How does even indoor exposure to natural world impact our body's function? Multiple studies are telling us that viewing indoor plants tends to induce physiological relaxation within 3 to 5 minutes. And that's measured by things like reduced pulse, lower diastolic and systolic blood pressure, stabilization of prefrontal cortex function, increased higher alpha and beta waves that indicate relaxation, decreases in theta waves of our frontal lobe, indicating increased focus or concentration. We'll talk more about that later. An activated parasympathetic system, decreasing stress response. And finally, we know that reduced stress response in the body is indicated by hormone changes as well. And so when we're thinking about, well, how can I increase my access to nature? It doesn't have to be take more vacation time, although I wouldn't say that that's a bad idea either. But thinking about how can we shift our workspaces, how can we shift our home spaces, how can we shift our routines and our kind of everyday access to the living world. And so I wanted to make sure that we all had that platform on kind of what does it mean when we're talking about access to nature? We don't have to make it super complicated. We don't have to pile on the coats and boots and get outdoors, although that's also wonderful for our emotional regulation and our physiological stress response. And so I wanted to just kind of put this in additional context of what is exposure to nature. So we heard 3 minutes, we heard 3 to 5 minutes, and I want to share a study that really looked at the different ways and the specific dosage that seems to have maximum benefit for us, for humans. So let me go ahead and start this video. It's just 2 minutes.
environmental psychology at the University of Exeter. The work we've been doing recently is focusing on how much time you should spend in nature each week to be good for your health and well-being. There's lots of work now showing that it's good for people. The big question is, how much do you need? And we've been working with Natural England on a 2-year study with over 20,000 people to look at how much time you're spending in nature and is it good for health and well-being. So what we found was, basically, there seems to be a threshold of about 2 hours or 120 minutes. So compared to people who don't get out to nature at all, those who do 2 hours a week or more have higher well-being, and their health is generally better. So doing 60 or 90 minutes didn't seem to have the same benefits at all. It really needed to be at least 2 hours a week. What really amazed us was this was true for just about every group we could think of. It was true for people who lived in cities, people who lived in rural areas. It was true for people who lived in high versus low deprivation areas. It was true for men, women, old adults, younger adults, the rich, the poor, different ethnicities. And it was also true for people who had long-term illness or sickness or disability. So just getting out in nature, it doesn't have to be physical exercise, it could be just sitting on a bench, seemed to be good for just about everybody in the population. Well, what really amazed us about the 120-minute threshold, or 2 hours, is it doesn't seem to matter how you get it. You could go on one long walk for 2 hours on a Sunday, or you could go for 4 lots of 30 minutes during lunchtimes during the week. The benefits seem to be just the same. It didn't matter where in nature you went either.
Oops, sorry about that.
It could be on the beach, it could be on an urban park, or it could be in the woodlands. Again, it didn't matter whereabouts it was happening. This is the biggest study of its kind anywhere in the world, with over 20,000 people over 2 years, but it's still a snapshot in time. What we really need is what's called a prospective longitudinal study that follows people over several years, an experimental work where we ask people to spend different amounts of time in nature each week and follow them over a period of 3 or 4 weeks to look at their health and well-being. And that's work we've been conducting with the BBC's Trust Me, I'm a Doctor programme, and the results of that study are going to be aired in the autumn.
All right, so that's the magic number, that 2 hours a week. And I wanted to just pause and check in with folks to see how many people feel like 2 hours a week is something that they can achieve. How many folks feel like they could fit in 2 hours of any kind of exposure to nature? You could raise your hand, or you could let me know in the chat if that is something that feels feasible for you. I see Tamara's in, Vanessa's in, Pat's in. I know that Izzy's in with Sharon for sure. Having a dog to walk really helps you commit to at least 2 hours a week, if not a lot more than that. And so, yeah, we're going to spend some more time talking about how we can integrate that exposure to nature. You know, when we look at that Exeter study, I feel like it's really focused on getting outside into nature, and that's not always realistic. And when we think about how to build that in for ourselves, for our families, for our colleagues, for our students, that outdoor element could feel like too much of a barrier. So I do want to add that we will go ahead and address that before we wrap up today. But before we do that, I just wanted to share some more incredible research that's coming out about the impact of nature on our nervous systems. And since most of the time access to nature is free, we could just look outside at the sky. It seems like one of the lowest threshold stress buffers that we could access for ourselves, with minimal effort, minimal cost, minimal investment. So the next researcher that I wanted to share her work is Florence Williams. And so she recently published a book called The Nature Fix: Why Nature Makes Us Happier, Healthier, and More Creative. We haven't talked about that much about the impact that nature has on our creative function, on our concentration and our focus. So we're going to unpack that a little bit more. But I wanted to share just one of the key takeaways from Dr. Williams's work. One had to do with folks who are experiencing some mental health issues. So in her work, what they found is if you're depressed or anxious, social walking in nature boosts mood and really kind of creates multiple benefits through the exposure to nature, the connection to supportive relationships, and the engagement in physical activity. And so just kind of thinking about, again, ways to build resiliency, right? Not necessarily as the treatment, but maybe part of a response plan for if you're feeling like you need to build your resilience, you need to boost your mental health and wellness. Again, kind of the walks in nature are one of the things that Dr. Williams recommends as kind of a trifold of those 3 buffers that we know are really effective in supporting emotional regulation. And so I want to go ahead and just share one of the kind of illustrative elements to her work.
Walk into a forest, and within 5 minutes, your body and brain start to change. Your heart rate slows. Your facial muscles start to relax. Your hardworking frontal lobes begin to quiet down. And this will boost your productivity and creativity later in the day. I'm Florence Williams, and I've spent the last couple of years writing a book about how being in nature actually makes us more human. Here are some of the things I've learned from the new science looking at nature and our health. The smell of pine trees strengthens your immune system. When you hear birdsong or look at fractal patterns in nature, your brain puts out more alpha waves, making you feel both calm and alert. If you spend an hour and a half walking around living plants and animals, you'll be less preoccupied by your personal problems and feel more connected to people and the world around you. Finnish researchers say being in nature a minimum of 5 hours a month can make you happier overall. Why not give it a try? Go outside, go often, bring friends, breathe.
All right, so that's Florence Williams, just a brief introduction. You know, I think there's 2 elements to that. One is just the simplicity, but profound, the simplicity of the solutions that she's identified and the profound impact that they yield. Also, I've never seen an animated video like that with the like cutout art. And so I couldn't resist incorporating it today because I just thought it was very endearing and makes the case very simple and engaging. And if anybody's interested in the link, I can share that. But at this point, you know, we've kind of built the case that yes, all kinds of exposure to the natural world, whether it's indoors or outdoors, clearly has an impact on how our bodies are functioning. And exposure, engagement, access to nature in any of the most simple ways can really benefit us, and that's what we're looking for, right? What do we do to give ourselves a boost, to take care of ourselves without adding kind of extra to-dos, extra investment, extra resource intensity? Well, I think engagement in nature is one of the simple ones, but why, right? Why does nature have this kind of effect on us? So I'm just going to spend a little bit of time talking about that, and I'm very interested in any theories that you might have. There wasn't kind of a clear consensus as to why this had an impact on us, but we know that a number of experts are theorizing that it's the sense of awe that we experience in terms of why nature boosts our mental and physical well-being. We also know that it's probably why our grandmothers or elders encouraged us to get some fresh air or to get out of the house or to enjoy the sunshine. Research is showing us that positive emotions associated with awe in general correspond to lower levels of things like harmful inflammatory proteins in the body. And those things are linked to autoimmune disorders, depression, and a whole host of other stress-related disorders. So again, kind of combining this sense of the awe that we experience in any form of nature, really kind of reduces inflammation in the body, and therefore could be one of the factors that contribute to it building up our well-being. It could also just be that humans lived outdoors for a very long time, for thousands of years, and that's kind of like our natural state. And so brings us back to our sense of well-being. But again, you know, as this research is emerging, we're seeing shifts. We're seeing shifts at hospitals, we're seeing shifts on college campuses, we're seeing shifts on corporate campuses, and hopefully we're seeing some shifts on K-12 campuses as well, in terms of incorporating nature indoors and incorporating nature outdoors. I know kind of one of the programs that has been longstanding with many benefits is outdoor education programs. And so that's just kind of one of the examples of ways that we bring this to our young people. But I'm also kind of here today as a reminder that guess what, if it works for them, it's probably going to work for us too. And how can we, for our own well-being, for our own benefit, incorporate the benefits of awe, the benefits of nature some more. So that said, I'm going to shift us to talk a little bit about what do some of these strategies look like. So again, some of these are those common sense strategies that you're probably like, yeah, duh, Christina, but guess what? Researchers actually spend time looking to see which practices are most beneficial or most impactful. And so I'm going to talk us through some of those. So when we're talking about what are the best practices for the healing benefits of nature, I have 3 to share with you up front. So one is, guess what? Walk more outside, right? So we've talked about the benefits of physical movement as a stress buffer and the benefits it has for our heart and our muscles and our overall metabolism. And we've also connected that to the benefits of walking outside. We know from a study at Stanford University that participants who walked in green parklands showed increased attention and focus, more so than participants who walked in closed urban settings or on a treadmill. So all walking is not created equal. If you can do it outdoors or experiencing nature, you're going to get a little bit more of a boost. It also, in that same study, showed that the folks who were doing the outdoor walking showed less engagement in negative thinking and felt more confident about themselves than the control group who was walking in indoor parks or on treadmills. The next piece as a best practice is spend some working hours outside. And this could be tricky depending on the time of year. So let's assume best case scenario that the weather is friendly. And then we'll talk about unfriendly weather conditions, right? But just thinking about how much more flexibility we have in our current circumstances to access daily tasks outside. So for example, taking conference calls from your phone while you're sitting on a park bench, or even just stepping outside your building or your office for a portion of that. Making sure that whenever possible that we could have working meetings in the outdoors or on a walk are all kind of examples of how we could build some outside exposure into our daily practice. Without going out inside, even thinking about moving meetings or moving our individual selves to take phone calls from conference rooms that maybe have a view out the window. Again, I wanted to just tie this back to unfriendly weather conditions and remind you that it doesn't have to involve actually going outdoors, but views from the window and even access to virtual nature, so screensavers or having backdrop videos of natures, and we'll look at some of those in a little while, but having that exposure to nature also provides benefits. And so thinking about these simple ways to have backdrops of nature throughout the day while we're working are just, again, investments in our resilience and our well-being. And the last one we've talked a little bit about, which is plants at home. I'm going to add plants in the office. And so we know that growing plants at home doesn't just add beauty to your space, but it contributes to purifying the air that you're breathing. Studies have shown that indoor plants or a garden are beneficial for the mental health of people who live there. They help improve sensory awareness, cognitive functions, and they enhance focus overall. So again, I know a lot of people feel like they don't have a green thumb or they kill every plant that they bring into the house. And I'm going to say, if you're thinking about it as a something I'm good at versus something I'm going to fail at, then buy a plant and replace it once a week. We're not asking you to develop a green thumb. We're not asking you to add like one more thing to your list of things that you need to take care of. But just like we saw in those earlier studies today, having fresh flowers, having plants cycled through the spaces where you're spending a lot of time really bring those benefits. I was telling Sharon as we were getting started, and Brandy caught me talking about my own self-care practices. And in addition to trying to reduce the number of things that I'm responsible for taking care of besides myself, I have done that with my plants. So I feel like I have had, as I mentioned, quadrupled my house plant count since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, and was finding myself spending too much time worrying about and tending to and having ridiculous emotional relationships with plants that were struggling. And I turned a new corner and was like, I'm not having struggling plants in my life. If you're not thriving, then you're not in my life anymore. And I'd rather cycle through plants than spend my emotional energy benefiting them. So I'm not even looking for reciprocity with my plants anymore. I'm looking for all of the benefits. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of shift into our 2 sets of tips for how to notice nature in our day-to-day basis. So the first one really has to do with what we can do for ourselves. The next batch is really going to focus on what can we do with our colleagues, because we're thinking about this in terms of workplace wellness as well. So some of these you're probably already doing. So, a lot of you have routines to regularly do a walk with a friend outside. I'm gonna add caveats to number 2 here, which is don't wait for perfect weather, get outside anyway. And maybe that just means take an extra 3 moments when you're walking to and from your car to take those breaths of fresh air, or to look up at the sky or look down at the ice, whatever your circumstances are. Again, just kind of adding little steps to it. This one we talked about in terms of adding the plants to your home. And then making a point to incorporate any access that you might have to parks. And this could include, a lot of times the shopping malls that we're in or the airports that we visit are incorporating park-like spaces indoors. And so thinking about atriums that we might visit or museums that offer indoor spaces with the natural world in it are all kind of low barrier items that reap high rewards for our nervous systems. And so I'm going to go ahead and move us forward again to think about how do we incorporate this in cultures of care in our workplace. And so when we think about what can we do to make this a collaborative effort to set norms in the workplace, talking about nature, noticing the nature that we have access to in our workplaces is going to be key. Making sure that we're adding plants or cycling through plants at our workspace, building in some sort of like show and tell, bring your plant this week, I'll bring my plant next week type of initiative with your colleagues can, again, be a simple way to spruce things up and to get some of those benefits, as well as contribute to these norms around what are easy ways to build in wellness and self-care in the spaces that we're spending time in. We've talked about the weather permitting outdoor walks, including with colleagues. And then this is one I want to spend a little bit more time on and share some examples from the work that I'm doing, which is to keep photos of nature around you. So whether it's photography, whether it's calendars, whether it's screensavers, whether it's the screensaver on your phone or your other smart devices, these are all ways that we can kind of bring the natural world in in virtual format and reap, again, probably not this, and I didn't find any studies on this differential, but probably get some of the benefits, if not the full benefits, as if we were directly exposed or directly engaged with nature. And so all of those kinds of things can benefit the community, the communal spaces that we're sharing, as well as promote our own wellness. So before we move on, I wanna spend just a couple moments sharing. This is gonna be like putting what we're talking about into action. So this is the experiential element of our time together today. As I was preparing for this session, I started looking for, okay, like what are the solutions if it's negative 30 degrees and stormy outside and we're just not going to have that direct relationship with nature in terms of stepping outdoors, and thinking about those kind of prolonged periods of time when, for a variety of reasons, it might just not be realistic to directly engage with the natural world. And so one of the resources that I found that's available to all of us are these kind of guided experiences in nature that are available for free on most media platforms. And so I'm not a huge person on social media, but I do populate my Instagram with images that make me feel happy. And that includes getting feed from National Geographic, from Earth Pics, from these kind of sources that are just providing imagery and short videos of nature. That's it. They're not selling anything. They're not promoting anything. They're not influencing anything. They're just contributing to my well-being by coming across my feed and showing me something beautiful in the natural world. And so we're going to spend maybe, let me look at the clock here. Maybe we'll spend about 3 minutes or so in this next experiential phase looking at nature together without actually stepping outdoors together. Okay, I'm going to pause us at this big fallen tree. I bet you wonder what happens next. But again, this is just one of so many resources. You can, I know Sharon would pick the walk on the beach. I don't know what sort of experiential virtual nature would resonate with the rest of you. But again, there's so many resources, and this was 3 minutes. This was our 3-minute dose of the day. And so thinking about, how we can incorporate this type of backdrop as the beginning to some of our meetings when we have folks waiting in the lobby of a Zoom meeting, or if folks are back in person, having this on as backdrop before a meeting gets started or during breaks, are all ways that kind of contribute to exposing us to these natural stress buffers. And so I'm going to go ahead and take questions in just a moment, but I want to move us forward. Just a couple more slides. What we're talking about today is just giving ourselves permission, right? Giving ourselves permission to focus on our basic human needs in really simple and accessible ways that reap major rewards. So taking care of ourselves by prioritizing time in nature. And we know that it's not just you that's going to benefit, right? So of course, yes, that's the point of this whole series, is your wellness and your resiliency. But we know that it's not just you that's going to benefit, but your improved cognitive functioning, your improved emotional regulation, your improved stress response that results from these types of things, like engaging in nature, exposure to nature, access to the natural world, are going to benefit the other humans in your life as well. And that kind of contributes to that culture of care that we'll talk about in just a moment. But in today's session, we were just talking about exposure to nature, and it's just one of the 7 that we address in this series. And so again, kind of thinking about, what does science tell us? What can we draw on from our cultural heritage, from the traditions of our elders that help us take care of ourselves during a sometimes stressful period, ongoing stressful periods at work, at home, in our lives. We again kind of want to think about what are accessible, low barrier, low resource intensity ways that you can help take care of yourself, so that you can keep being human with good health in the short term, good health in the long term, and vitality all the time. And so this is part of the way that we're building collective care or cultures of care for Alaska schools. Right? Thinking about, how do we come together to set the norms, to set the standards, to start the dialogues and engage in the practices that we know are going to benefit our entire school community. We know we've been doing a lot of work around school wellness, student mental health and wellness, and we're expanding that through this project to be inclusive of everyone on campus, including our adults on campus and our partners on campus. And so, before we break for discussion, I just wanted to remind you, we have more in our series. So we're going to take a little break for about a month, and our next session won't be until January 11th. And that one is going to focus on physical movement without much effort. How do you do that, Christina? I don't know, you're going to have to tune in and find out. But we know that physical movement is one of the critical 7 stress buffers that helps us stay balanced and helps us stay healthy and well. And so for those of you who just love to know, like, where did you find all this stuff, Christina? And is it really true, or did you make it up because it just sounds like it's true? Well, our grandmothers can certainly affirm it. And then if you're dying to know about any of the references, they'll be available in the PowerPoint that Sharon's going to upload to the website. And finally, if you just didn't get enough of any of the content today, there's some additional content in here in terms of a meta-analysis or a review of a lot of these research studies all in one place, and 2 other videos from Florence Williams that I found particularly insightful and useful about how exposure to nature really changes our wellness. So I'm going to stop screen share for a moment and see if folks have questions or want to share kind of what are some of their best practices for engaging in nature as part of your wellness practice. Anybody have questions or comments? Sharon, I'm just seeing your comment. You're making me laugh.
Izzy the dog wants her walk once or twice a day at least.
Yes.
And when you were playing the video, she heard the birds and had to come look in the door to see if there was something she might be missing.
Yes, we can do some virtual walks with Izzy and see if she likes those.
Yep. Anybody got any other comments for Christina or things that they do?
I just really appreciated the connection with outdoor education. Having done that and watching my young adult daughter do that right now, and hear the stories about it. Yeah, it's such an amazing thing for children, and gosh, like you said, it's got to be good for us too at the same time. So
exactly.
Really
yeah, I mean, I feel like a lot of times, Pat, with that sort of thing, we feel like we're being indulgent, or we feel like, you know, that we're taking away from something else if we spend time playing in nature, you know, riding our mountain bikes or going off-roading or whatever your jam is, you know, fishing, any of those things.
Or even just sticking your hands in the dirt and gardening.
Or gardening, absolutely.
Or
and
running
really,
heavy equipment, that works too.
Sharon. Okay. But it's true, you know, that investing in ourselves and taking some time to invest in ourselves really does exponentially benefit us, because then we're better able to show up for those folks in our lives that need us, that are expecting us there. So that's really the main objective of this is really helping you reconnect with your own self-care so that we can have that strong baseline and be prepared for connecting with other folks in our lives meaningfully.
Yeah, I appreciated Michelle's comment about her mom having her kids play in the dirt in the garden with the garden tools. What a great thing.
It is great. All right. Well, I think we can call it a wrap for today. Again, appreciate all of you participating and your contributions and sharing some really beautiful examples of your connection to the natural world. And I appreciate them. I appreciate the work that you're doing in your schools and in your community, and wish you well. We're going into a busy time of year. And so here's a boost for you to get you through the next month until we reconnect in January. Sharon, anything else before we conclude today?